All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Reynoldsburg City Schools Parent University. This is our next installment of a series of events that we'll have for our parents throughout this year, next school year, and into the future, so we can talk about topics that are important to you and give you an opportunity to get information from experts in the field. Tonight, we're talking about an incredibly important topic, that being youth suicide prevention and awareness. A topic that we all need to be familiar with and be aware of so that we can prevent tragedies from happening. The past year has provided us with plenty of opportunity to have these types of conversations and understanding what isolation has done to some of our students and to adults for that matter. And this particular issue is paramount to what has taken place over the last year. Naturally, this has always been part of what we have to confront in schools and in communities. It's important that we do those things together in order to prevent things from happening to our kids. So tonight, we're pleased to have a slate of important, profound comments and guests who can talk about this topic from a very informed position and give you some tips and some ideas of about what to look for and how to prevent things. We're very pleased that you joined us tonight, and with that in mind, I'll turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Dave Baker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Everyone, thank you so much for taking your time out of your evening to join us for what Dr. Brown shared is a very, very important topic. Of all of the topics that we have planned for this series, this is probably one of the most challenging ones for us to talk about, but it's one of the most necessary ones. And I'm so grateful that we have community members out there willing to join us tonight and listen in to the experts that we have, both experts from our partners around Central Ohio, as well as our own team members who work so hard to make sure your students are taken good care of during the day and even outside the school day as needed. Let me just run through the agenda for you tonight. We're going to start by just going over the purpose of Parent University in general and talking about our intended outcomes for this evening. Then we'll be hearing from three stakeholder groups. We have the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation with us tonight, who are going to walk through the ABCs of youth suicide. Our own mental health team is going to be talking about what to do and who to turn to when you have a kiddo in crisis or you're worried about your child. And then we're also going to hear from our great partners at Nationwide Children's Hospital, who are going to talk about some of those supports and how the supports at both school and the community work together to support our kiddos and families. And then we'll close and send you on your way for the evening. With that, let's talk just a little about Parent University in general and what we try to accomplish. We really have three main goals through our Parent University series, and hopefully over time we've had two sessions now, and this is our third one that we're doing for the year. And hopefully over time we'll be able to demonstrate that we're accomplishing these goals. But we really aim to, one, increase the parent or caregiver involvement in our schools. We want to share relevant information that really drives that student experience and helps connect the student experience with home also. And then we want to make sure that we support you parents and guardians and caregivers as you're raising your kids, because we all have that common goal of wanting to make sure that our kiddos are successful and ready for life, and it takes all of us to help do that. So the more information that we can share from our experts and get in your hands, the better our kiddos will be in the end. Val, if we could go to our outcomes for tonight, thank you. We have four main outcomes we're going to try to accomplish this evening. And hopefully, as you are listening to all of our speaker groups, you'll see these outcomes come through in their presentations. As well, tomorrow you'll receive an email with a survey link, and we'll ask you for your feedback. And really that feedback is basically, did we accomplish these outcomes? Did you get the information that we set out to share? Hopefully you'll hear that information and you'll give us that feedback in that survey. But our outcomes for tonight, one is just understanding the terminology that's related to this topic. When we're talking about suicide and mental health, there's so many clinical words that are out there that the clinicians use in the mental health world that aren't necessarily terms or phrases that we hear all the time in school or at home. And so we thought it'd be a good idea to do that little vocabulary lesson and just make sure we're all level-setted and on the same page with what we're talking about. We want to make sure that you as parents and caregivers understand those warning signs. What are those things to look for? Our kiddos aren't always going to tell us they're in crisis. And so we have to watch that body language and watch for those other signs that come out with kiddos when they're dealing with an issue. And so hopefully we will be able to convey that to you tonight. A third outcome for us is just how to go about having that tough conversation with your child. This is a tough conversation to have. It's a difficult topic. And so we wanted to arm your tool belt a little bit and give you some sentence starters and some things and ways to bring up the subject. With that in mind, I'll go over the last outcome and then I'll share a thought with you. The last one is just so that you as parents and caregivers understand what supports are already in place. We have great supports in our schools. We are a phone call and email away anytime you need something related to your child and your child's mental health. And so certainly understand where you can go and where you can turn to immediately. It's going to be crucial for tonight. One caveat I do want to throw out there, and given that this is such a tough topic, you as parents and caregivers will want to decide, do you want your child next to you while we're having this presentation tonight? Or do you want to kind of view it, listen to it, absorb the information, and then engage your child in that conversation? Different moms, dads, and caregivers will go about it a different way. You of course know your child best, and so you decide if you want your child to be engaged this evening or if you want to engage them on your own later. That's will be my little throw out to you. With that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for the evening. Austin Lucas is the program director at the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, and I had the pleasure of getting to know Austin in my previous role when we were working together on a strategic plan for the entire state of Ohio around suicide awareness and prevention. And I was so thrilled when he agreed to join us tonight and go and take you through the ABCs of youth suicide. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Austin Lucas.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. We can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. All right. As Dave said, my name is Austin Lucas, and I am the program director at the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. I just want to give a little bit of a background about our organization, who we are, what we do, just before we get started with things. So the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, or OSPF, we are a statewide nonprofit organization that provides suicide prevention resources, programming, trainings, events, and advocacy work as well for all Ohioans. We're really about bringing that local voice of suicide prevention to the forefront, to the State House, in order to do some of this advocacy type work. And when I say that we provide suicide prevention resources to all Ohioans, I mean all Ohioans. We provide trainings and resources to those that provide the direct care service, so those clinicians and those crisis counselors that are actually doing the direct work. But we also provide training and education to general Ohioans as well. We have a lot of trainings out there that general community members can benefit from on how to have a conversation with somebody who might be suicidal, how to recognize those warning signs. And when we get into this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about some of those warning signs, some of those risk factors, what to look out for if you think that your child, or honestly just anybody in your life, might be exhibiting that might indicate that they may be thinking about suicide. But like I said, we do a lot of work at OSPF for strategic planning around suicide prevention with a lot of key stakeholders around the state. Nationwide Children's Hospital, who you will hear from in a little bit. They're one of our valued partners as well. So really glad to be working with them on this presentation as well. We do support those local communities to increase their capacity to prevent suicide. And we also have a lot of awareness. We do a lot of awareness work as well through campaign work and through training as well. Go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So Dave kind of already went over a little bit of an agenda, but I'll just go ahead and go over it again. We will get into some common terminology. Again, like Dave said, there are a lot of terms out there that that folks outside of the behavioral health and mental health workforce may not know about, that we kind of regularly throw around in the field. So just getting you used to some of that terminology, I think would be beneficial. Then we'll talk about some suicide statistics. We'll talk some national stats. We'll go down state level and even some local statistics as well. And the purpose of that section really is to just kind of orient your mind to think about where we are at with the suicide issue in our country and in our state, in order to motivate us. What can we all do together to, how can we work together to actually prevent suicide and actually lower those statistics and those trends? Then we'll get into those some common suicide myths. There are many myths out there about suicide and suicide prevention, and many, if not all, are very stigmatizing to those that either have that personal experience with suicide, whether they struggle with suicidal thoughts themselves, or that maybe they know somebody who struggles with suicidal thoughts, or maybe they have even lost somebody to suicide. We'll talk about some of those myths and the corresponding facts with those myths as well. Then we'll get into suicide warning signs and risk factors. So what are you going to actually look out for if you think that somebody might be thinking about suicide? And then at the end, I do have a couple resources that the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation does provide for parents, for students in the K-12 age range. All right, so some common terminology. I didn't want to throw out too many terms out there, but there are some common terminology that I will be referencing throughout my portion of the presentation here that I think will be beneficial for you all to know. So suicidal ideation. When we say suicidal ideation, we're really saying suicidal thoughts. So thinking about, considering, or planning for suicide. Suicide loss survivor. When we say somebody is a suicide loss survivor, we are talking about those who are left behind, the loved ones who are bereaved after a suicide. Suicide risk factors. So these are factors that actually make it more likely that somebody will become suicidal. It doesn't mean that they will, it's just more likely that they will or can become suicidal. There are certain risk factors out there. For suicide protective factors. So these are actually the opposite of risk factors. These are factors that are in place that may make it less likely that somebody will become suicidal. And the last term I wanted to throw out there for you is means. And when we talk about means in terms of suicide and suicide prevention, we are talking about the actual instrument or physical object that's actually used to carry out a suicide attempt. And you'll see in a couple slides why I wanted to use that term. It is a term that's widely used in the field of suicide prevention. And there are some means that are more common than others. And it's important to recognize what those means are, especially if you are looking to prevent suicide. Before we go ahead and actually get started, I do want to give a brief acknowledgement to those with lived experience who might be watching this presentation with us tonight. Because suicide is more common than a lot of people think about, or a lot of people want to believe. Many people have that lived experience. Maybe that is you yourself. You have that lived experience, that personal experience with suicide. Maybe you know somebody that has attempted suicide, or maybe you've lost a loved one to suicide. And I just want to acknowledge those out there today that are watching, and that we appreciate you for coming to this presentation. We know that that's not easy at all for those who do have that personal experience. So again, I just want to thank you for coming today. And also, if you do need to step out or step away from your screen, whatever device you're using to watch, if things become too tough for you at any point, please feel free to step away. We totally understand. Okay, so now I talked about, I mentioned that we're going to talk about some myths out there. Like I said, there are many myths out there around suicide and suicide prevention. A lot of those are very stigmatizing, and oftentimes they are what are preventing folks from actually getting the help that they need. A lot of times they are barriers. So, it's actually okay to talk to somebody about suicide. There is a myth out there that, if you talk about suicide, you might put that idea into somebody's mind. We know that that's not true. Actually, talking to somebody about suicide will not put the idea into somebody's mind. A lot of times that actually opens up an avenue for intervention. It actually starts that conversation with that individual. A lot of times an individual will not come forward with their own suicidal ideations. So, you being somebody that cares about somebody else, actually taking that first initiative and asking about suicide is very helpful. And it's either somebody is thinking about suicide or they're not. Like I said, you can't put that thought into somebody's mind. Another one, so many people that are considering suicide do talk about it with those around them. A lot of times people may think that, people will hide their suicidal ideations. They won't share that they're suicidal. They'll keep their plans to themselves. But what we do know is that people may speak directly about their intentions, but sometimes they may speak indirectly about how they feel. And we'll talk about some of those verbal warning signs when we get to that part. And we also know that suicide is preventable. It's absolutely preventable. There are a lot of evidence-based interventions out there, a lot of evidence-based treatments out there for those that do suffer with suicidal ideation and suicidality. And those struggling with suicide actually do not want to die. They actually do want help. Just in their mind, they can't think about any other possible outcome for their life other than to take their own life. But we do know that suicide is preventable. There are resources out there, and folks can get the help that they need and recover. And we also know that anybody can prevent suicide. You do not have to be a mental health or behavioral health professional to have a caring conversation with your youth, with a friend, with a family member, with a colleague. And like I mentioned, OSPF, we do provide trainings for individuals that do want to learn more about how to have that conversation. But again, it's not solely up to the behavioral health professionals to actually intervene at that point. We know that oftentimes a loved one, a friend, a family member are the first people that somebody who's struggling with suicidal thoughts confides in first. So that individual plays an important role in suicide prevention as well. So now I want to get into some of those suicide statistics. Like I said, we're going to start more national, then we'll move down to state and some local level stats as well. So here you see suicide numbers in the United States, suicide deaths in the United States from 2009 to 2019. And apart from 2019, we did see a little bit of a decrease. But from 2009 all the way up to 2018, we did see, unfortunately, every year, those numbers did increase. Like I mentioned, 2019, they did decrease, but not by much. In Ohio, on average, we lose about 5 people per day to suicide. I do have a few more statistics and trends to talk about with you. So in Ohio, suicide is actually the 11th leading cause of death. From year to year, it bounces back and forth between the 10th and the 11th leading cause of death in Ohio amongst all ages. So it is up there on those leading causes of death. From 2007 to 2018, suicide has increased by 44.8%, and that's all demographics, all individuals. Suicide deaths have increased by 56% in about a 10-year period. And what's more, alarming is that the demographic that experienced one of the larger increases is youth ages 10 to 24 actually experienced a 56% increase in suicides from 2007 to 2018. And historically, we know that males account for about 80%, anywhere between 75 to 80% of all Ohio suicides. That's not just an Ohio problem. That's actually a national problem for a couple of key reasons. Oftentimes, men are more reluctant to share their feelings, their thoughts, to go seek help. Right? There's that myth, there's that stigma out there that it's unmanly to talk about your feelings. Of course, we know that's not true. Of course, we know that help works. We know that treatment works. But another key risk factor for males, males tend to use more lethal means overall as a way to take their own life. And on the flip side of that, females do tend to attempt suicide more often because on average, not all, but on average, females tend to use less lethal means. So the rate of survival from those attempts is higher. So in 2019, there was a survey that was given out. It's a national survey, but in Ohio, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey for high school students. And when they were asked in the last 12 months, 15.6% reported that they seriously considered suicide. 10.5% reported that they had made a plan, and 6.8% reported that they had attempted suicide. So again, you know, suicidal ideation is more common than a lot of people like to think. And as parents and as loved ones of a youth, I think that that's important to know. You know, that you should be looking out for some key warning signs, and we'll get to that part in just a little bit. Here you see the number of youth suicides, 10 to 24, by age and sex in Ohio in 2018. I just wanted to break it down by age group. There's a statistic out there that suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24. That's absolutely true, but I did want to break this down further. Here you see, you know, the 20 to 24 age range. So outside of the K to 12 realm, that's where the majority of those numbers do come from in Ohio. But as you can see, unfortunately, kids as young as 10 all the way up to 19, there are still suicides occurring in that age range. Here is the number and rate of youth suicides, 10 to 24 in Ohio, 2007 to 2018. And here you can see on average an upward trend as well. On the screen here, this is the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States. So now we're pulling it back out nationally from 2007 to 2017, broken down by age group. I kind of already went into the age group, so I won't elaborate on this too much more here. But like I mentioned, youth ages 15 to 24, and then even the age 25 to 34. I know that's outside of the population that we're talking about today, but it is important to note that it is the second leading cause of death, and the third leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 14, and that's third only behind unintentional injuries, so accidental death and cancer. Here, I always like to share this map when I give presentations, just because a lot of people like to see a visual representation of Ohio suicide rates. So this is rates. This number is different from the actual death number. Death number is the crude number. The total number of suicides. The rate is per 100,000 individuals in any given area. So the darker the green counties in Ohio, the higher the suicide rates. This came from a study that actually came out of Ohio University a couple of years ago that looked at suicide death numbers and trends in Ohio. Also briefly, I do want to talk about suicide attempts because, you know, oftentimes we get caught up talking about suicide deaths and suicide death trends and statistics. But also I think it's important to talk about suicide attempts just because even though these people may never die by their own hand, they deserve some respect to talk about. They are still suffering every day with suicidal thoughts that they want to take their own life. So we will never truly know the number of attempts out there. And this is because oftentimes, you know, sometimes individuals will attempt suicide and then they will survive their attempt, but they'll never tell anybody about that attempt. Now, just because they never told anybody or they never went to the hospital or they never told their behavioral health provider, that doesn't mean that that wasn't an attempt. It still counts. You will just never know. So the best estimate that we have out there, and this is probably a conservative estimate, because like I said, we will never know the true amount of suicide attempts out there. But for every documented suicide death, there are 25 documented suicide attempts. So 25 times more suicide attempts in the United States than suicide deaths. Okay, so now I want to get into those warning signs for suicide. So what are we going to look out for if we think that somebody might be suicidal, right? And I'm going to talk about some key warning signs that may be more prevalent during COVID-19 as well, and risk factors. So it's also important to note, I'll just say this up front, that it is never just one thing. It's never just one risk factor that makes somebody it's never just one thing that leads somebody to attempt to take their own life. There's a combination of risk factors that add up over time that get somebody to that point. And it's important to note that because oftentimes we will see in certain situations where the finger will be pointed at one particular risk factor. Oh, this kid was bullied, and that's why that kid decided to take his or her own life. Now, that may have been one of the risk factors. That may have been one of the key risk factors, but it is never just one thing. It's a combination of risk factors and warning signs that add up over time. But right now, we're going to talk about some verbal warning signs. So these are things that a youth or an individual might say, that they might verbalize, that may indicate that they are thinking about suicide. So there are direct verbal warning signs, and then there are indirect verbal warning signs. So on the screen here, I just have a few examples for you for each one, direct versus indirect. So direct, these are individuals who are explicitly and directly telling you about their intent. They are telling you that they want to take their own life. They're telling you they want to kill themselves. So some examples of that: I want to die. I wish I were dead. So the third bullet point here, this is common language that individuals may use. Commit suicide. You may have heard, or you may not have, but you may have heard that as a field of suicide prevention, we are trying to encourage folks to move away from the phrase commit suicide. And that is because oftentimes commit has a negative connotation associated with it, such as you commit a crime, you commit murder, you're committed to a hospital. But also, when you say commit, when you're making a commitment, you are saying that, you're basically saying that you're not going to pull out from that commitment, right? It is a commitment. But that is the opposite message that we want to convey in suicide prevention, right? If you're saying that you're committing to something, you're not pulling out from that decision, right? But we do know that suicide is preventable. So a lot of times commit does have a negative, and often it has a negative connotation associated with it. So again, this is how people talk, but again, this is more for your own knowledge. But if your kid, your child, if anybody in your life is telling you that they want to commit suicide, that's not the time to give them the same lecture I just gave you, right? Let them talk how they want to talk. They are the ones who are struggling. They're the ones who are suffering. So it's more important that you just listen to them. But I brought that up because that is a phrase that people do still say. I just wanted to point out that we are trying to move away from that phrase, commit suicide. But so a couple other examples: if something doesn't happen, I'm going to kill myself. If my girlfriend or boyfriend breaks up with me, I'm going to kill myself. I don't want to live anymore. So those are some direct verbal warning signs. There are also indirect verbal warning signs as well. So these are people who are kind of hinting at their intent, but they're not explicitly telling you that they want to take their own life, right? So some examples: I'm tired of this. I just can't go on. I wish I could just go to sleep and never wake up. No one would care if I was gone anyway. I just want out. I feel trapped, like things will never get better. I won't be around much longer, and pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. So there are also some behavioral warning signs. So these are behaviors that a youth or an individual may exhibit that may indicate that they are more at risk for suicide. So number one, acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills, right? And again, acquiring a gun on its own, but that's another issue for youth, right? This is more relevant for adults, right? About the acquiring a gun part, but still, nevertheless, acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills is something that you want to look out for. Co-occurring depression or any other mental illness. We do know that those that do go on to die by suicide, the majority of those individuals do have a diagnosable mental health condition, meaning they were either officially diagnosed before their death, or they could have met the criteria for a mental health diagnosis. Putting personal affairs in order, giving away prized possessions, right? Any collectibles, valuables that has a lot of sentimental value to somebody, if they're just up and giving that away, and maybe even pairing it with, I won't need these items where I'm going, or I won't need this anymore. Kind of raises a red flag there. Drug or alcohol misuse or a relapse after a period of recovery. There are many risk factors that are similar with drug and alcohol misuse with suicide. putting those two together, that just further complicates that risk. Social isolation. I have this one highlighted just because during the time of COVID, right, especially when kids weren't meeting face to face, kids might feel isolated, right? They're away from their friends. They're not seeing their friends in school anymore face to face, right? Maybe they don't have extracurricular activities anymore. Maybe they're used to playing a sport and they're not anymore. Social isolation is a key risk factor for suicide. Unexplained anger, aggression, and irritability is also another warning sign there. And the last one, this last bullet point often goes overlooked. And it's a sudden shift to a positive mood and or increase in energy following a long period of depression. So what I mean by this is that somebody, may be depressed for a really long period of time. It's kind of well known that this individual is depressed. Other people are aware of this. And then suddenly, like, the flip of a switch, this individual seems like everything's better. They're very energetic, outgoing, right? And they just seem like they have miraculously recovered, right? They've snapped out of their depression. But this goes overlooked because, again, people start to think, wow, this person's better. I don't have to worry about them as much anymore. But actually the opposite is true. And this is because, that sudden shift to a positive mood, oftentimes it's because that individual has finally made up their mind that they want to take their own life. They have, they've gone a long period of time back and forth in their own mind, having, that mental argument with themselves. Do I want to live? Do I want to die? Am I going to kill myself? Am I not going to kill myself? And now they have finally made up their mind, and it gives them some sense of relief. And a lot of times we will see a sudden increase in mood. But that's a very high risk time. And that's something that you do want to look out for. There are also situational warning signs. So these are oftentimes very negative life events that may occur for somebody. And like I said at the beginning, it's never just one thing that leads somebody to taking their own life. So keep that in mind. So any one of these events by themselves oftentimes would not indicate that somebody is suicidal. It's just if somebody already has risk factors in place and they start adding up, and then one of these situational events occurs, that may be a very critical time and high risk time for that individual. So any major change or disruption in daily life, being expelled from school. So I highlighted that part because that's particularly relevant to this audience here. Expelled from school, death of a spouse or child or best friend, just any loved one, anybody close to that individual, and especially if by suicide. A recent unwanted move. Oftentimes we will see that with kids whose family members either get jobs, across the country, and they have to uproot their friend group, change schools. That causes a lot of turmoil for those kids. Any loss of any major relationship, right? So a breakup of a girlfriend or boyfriend, or best friend or friends in general. Diagnosis of a serious terminal illness. Sudden unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment. So this would be something like, getting sentenced to jail or juvenile detention, and loss of a cherished therapist, counselor, or teacher, or any mentor for that youth, and bullying as well. So I talked about risk factors. So I quickly want to talk about protective factors. And like I said at the beginning, protective factors, these are oftentimes the exact opposite of risk factors. So protective factors, these are often things in somebody's life, positive things in somebody's life that would normally, that would prevent suicide, right? That would be in place for this individual. So like I said, the opposite of the risk factors. So a calm environment for that youth, right? A calm family environment. Healthy coping skills, right? Remaining sober, right? Not engaging in any substance misuse. Restricted access to lethal means. I won't go through all of these, but even pets, right? Friends, a sense of connectedness with their environment and with their community. And I wanted to point out protective factors because on the next slide, there is a theory out there. It's Joiner's theory of suicide. Why individuals might die by suicide. And per this theory, the risk factors for an individual would have to dramatically outweigh the protective factors for that individual for a theoretical suicide attempt. And per this model, I won't go into this too much because it uses some clinical terms out there. But theoretically, for a suicide attempt to occur, an individual would have to have, this is like a triple Venn diagram. All three aspects of this triple Venn diagram would have to occur simultaneously for the individual. So thwarted belongingness just means that somebody perceives that they do not belong to either their friend group, their family, their community. That may not be true. That's just how that individual perceives it. They just don't belong. Also, at the same time, they must perceive that they are a burden, right? And again, the key word is perceived. That might not actually be true in reality. Others might consider this person as belonging in their friend group and their, with their family. But to the person who is suffering with suicidal thoughts, it's all about how they perceive their situation. So somebody who doesn't perceive they belong and somebody who doesn't perceive, or somebody who perceives that they're a burden, that's when you might have, a desire for suicide, right? You might start to think about suicide, but you're not acting on those suicidal thoughts. You have suicidal ideation at that point. Now, theoretically, for a suicide attempt to occur, the capability for suicide must also be in place at the same time. So capability, do they have the means? Do they have access to those means to attempt suicide? Have they attempted suicide in the past? If so, they are more capable in the future just because they're more familiar with that act. But I just wanted to show you this brief model. I like this model because it gets people, it helps people understand how somebody might get to that point to take their own life. Next slide, please. So I did talk about warning signs, some statistics, risk factors, protective factors, but now I want to focus on the last part here, just a couple of resources that the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation does have for youth. One of them being Life is Better With You Here. This is a new campaign that we are running. It is for African-American youth because recent trends have shown an increase in suicide deaths and suicide attempts within African-American youth, particularly African-American male youth. So this is a campaign that we have launched. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So there are two phases to this campaign. The first one was focusing on those young Black men, and Black youth as well. Like I had mentioned, that the suicide rate and the suicide deaths have increased in recent years for that demographic. And according to the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey from 1991 to 2017, suicide attempts did raise by 73% in young Black teens. So OSPF and partners, we've partnered with Canvas, which is a Black-owned media company, to create this campaign. We've had a lot of pop-up events, but on the website, withyouhere.org, you can see it in the bottom right-hand corner. You can check that out. There are a lot of resources, a lot of some of those warning signs I talked about, how you can start that conversation, and how you can point somebody in the right direction to get help. And this is, I already mentioned the website. So again, this is just a little more information on that website. The goal is to bring awareness to mental health issues in the Black community, as well as inform young Black men that they are not alone. Phase 2, this is what we are currently working on. We are going to include young Black women as well. This is what we are working on right now. So we plan to learn more on our coalitions, to hold pop-up events, and offer more resources. The other resource I want to mention is Be Present Ohio. So this is another youth program and campaign that we are running right now. Next slide, please. Sorry, back up one more, please. All right, so so be present. What it really means is, how can you be present as a friend? So this is for youth. It's also for parents too, but when we're focusing on youth, how can you be present for another friend? How can you be that gatekeeper for for that peer of yours? How do you recognize those warning signs? How do you have a conversation? How do you encourage your fellow student, your peer, to actually go seek help? We can skip this one. So how do you actually get involved with the Be Present program and campaign? We do have an Instagram account, Be Present Ohio. Also, our Facebook is Be Present Ohio. The website is bepresentohio.org. And like I mentioned, it offers self-care tips, how to be there for a friend, those common warning signs you can look out for, how to set healthy boundaries. There are also some yoga videos out there as well. So thank you.
Austin, thank you so very much for taking some time tonight and sharing your expertise with all of us here in our community. And please, on behalf of the Reynoldsburg community, please thank everyone over at the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation for doing this work for all of the communities like us across the state of Ohio. We really appreciate the care you are giving to make sure that at some point, as we work through that strategic plan that was so well done, that we get to the point where in Ohio there are no lives lost. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
With that, we've heard a lot about the state and some national statistics and a lot of that valuable information about warning signs. I want to bring things down to the local level, and it's my great pleasure to introduce 3 members of our own mental health team here in Reynoldsburg City Schools. The first is Christina Dune. She is our social worker at French Run Elementary School. We have Sarah Guidi, who is the counselor at the 9X Impact Academy. And then finally, Amara Seidner, who is the social worker at the HS Squared STEM Academy. They also have a very special guest who will be joining them, but I'm not going to put that surprise out there yet. I'm going to let them introduce that guest when they get to it. But it's my pleasure to turn things over to our own mental health team. Christina, Sarah, and Mara.
Thank you for that introduction. So first I wanted to start off kind of touching on the Reynoldsburg City Schools approach to mental health. So that is just being able to break down those barriers and those stigmas against mental health and creating a pathway to support that is focused on supporting the family and the student both during times of need and beyond. So we want to be seen as a resource for families and students. So just touching on some of the school-based supports, this is going to look different at every level and every school, but generally it's going to be similar. So some schools have a school counselor and some have school social workers. Both have open door policies, both for students and families. Their focus area might just be a little bit different. Overall, there's a focus on academic, career, and social emotional aspects. And then some have focus on truancy and social emotional support groups as well. We also have a partnership with Nationwide Children's Hospital. And within that, we have school-based counseling that is offered for many of our students, in which we can provide direct referrals to in order to link our students with that services. We also have Southeast, and those services look different at every level. So some services are support groups, whereas others are just more of a school-based counseling service as well. And then we can also provide linkage and referrals to any other outside supports that are needed. So again, that's going to look different at every school and every need for every family. Thank you. Looking at other school-based supports, these might be wider school-based supports. So looking at what we do for Anti-Bullying Month and how we interact during that month. Social emotional learning lessons, which are more at the classroom-based level. Restorative practices, which takes the focus from more of a discipline perspective to relationship building and how to repair relationships, both between students to students when they have been harmed and from students to the teachers when incidences happen. And this just helps build positive relationships so that every student has at least one adult in the building that they feel safe and like they are comfortable to go and talk to. We also have Hope Squad, groups of selected members located at both the Summit and Livingston campuses. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Sarah to go ahead and talk more about that.
All right, so we're going to quickly touch on the high school level supports first. They're pretty similar to the other levels. So we do have social workers and school counselors. There's one at each academy. So each academy has a social worker that focuses on social emotional SEL groups and mental health supports. We have school counselors as well that can work with mental health supports, academic and career situations. And then we also have nationwide Children's Hospital, Southeast, and Hope Squad. And Hope Squad is what I'm going to get into on the next slide. So Hope Squad is a peer-to-peer suicide prevention program offered by a program from Cincinnati called Grant Us Hope. And Hope Squad members are nominated by their peers and selected based on number of nominations, level of trustworthiness, and overall character. These students are then trained to recognize the signs of suicidal behavior, and they're taught how to report them to trusted adults and other members of the Hope Squad team and advisors to get help. Students are more likely to approach their peers about these issues, and peers are more likely to recognize suicidal behaviors within each other. So it's a really beneficial program for us to have. We know that students are talking about these things. I think that we like to think that they're not, but they are. So it's really important to have this group together at this level, kind of being the eyes and ears and extra additional supports to what we already have on campus. To make this a little bit more authentic and to give you more of an idea of how Hope Squad works, we actually have one of our Hope Squad members here this evening, Emily Burt. She is a junior at HS Squared. And then Emily, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello.
Thank you again for coming this evening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually ask Emily a couple of questions about her Hope Squad experience as a member. So what inspired you to join Hope Squad on the Livingston campus?
Well, this is my first year at Reynoldsburg, and I really, really wanted to be more connected with my peers in addition to helping them out personally. Maybe they have their own troubles that they need resources for. And that's just something I really wanted to focus on moving to a new area.
Awesome. What is your role as a Hope Squad member?
My role as a Hope Squad member is to kind of listen to what they have to say, listen to maybe some of their problems, and then help allocate these resources to them. Because sometimes maybe they're like, I don't know where to go. I don't know who to get professional help from. And that's really what my job is as a Hope Squad member.
Thank you. How do you think that Hope Squad serves your academy's community?
I think it really does bring us together. I know recently we did a Hope Week, and we were actually able to get some of our classmates and some of our students to participate with each other, participate in certain activities, especially during this year. It was great to see people talking to people that they probably would not have talked to, especially with social distancing and having to use social media to communicate with each other.
And then what is something that you would like the parents of your peers or parents here with us this evening to know about Hope Squad and the program in general?
We're definitely not here to judge people or to use these things as conversation starters or gossips. We're not going to listen to you and then go and tell someone else about it in a disrespectful and a judgmental way. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to listen and to accommodate you and to, get you some help if you really need it.
Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate your time this evening, and you've been a fantastic asset to our Hope Squad this year.
Thank you.
All right, and I think we're ready to pass over to Mara.
Hello, yes, my name is Mara Sidnor. So now I'm going to talk about the warning signs of a crisis that may be developing and what we have to do if unfortunately we are tasked with having one of our students be in a crisis. So the school calls 911 to assist in transport of a student in crisis. The parent is always called and informed of what is going on as well. So And if we can't get in touch with a parent, we do our best to get in touch with your emergency contacts. So one important thing we do want you to be aware of is, who are the emergency contacts that you've designated? Are these people that you can trust to come and get your student in the event that we're having an emergency? We need to get them to a hospital and that they can inform you. That's really important. And then we coordinate care. So one of the great things about being partnered with Nationwide, it really allows for us to have almost a seamless transition of getting your student to Nationwide or perhaps another provider that can take it from there and do a more in-depth assessment of the student and determine whether or not they may need more help than can be provided just upon the school level. And then upon having a child return to school after experiencing crisis or having intense suicidal ideations, we have meetings with parents and the student and the school to transition them back to school and make sure they have the appropriate support that they need. So that means identifying triggers and ways to support the student, safety planning for the school environment, and often using our partnerships with Nationwide and Southeast. Next slide, please. And so in the event of a non-crisis, so say we have a student coming and they maybe just tell us that they have just suicidal thoughts, but they've never had any intention of acting on those thoughts. Like they're like, I'm thinking about suicide, but I know I'd never do it. At that level, the school, a social worker, or the counselor will have a conversation with the student. They may do an assessment to determine the risk level, and they'll identify the necessary support. So a referral to counseling or a referral to Nationwide if that's necessary. And then based on that conversation and assessment, we will always contact the parent. Even if the kid just says, I just had the thoughts, but nothing else, we will still make sure to inform you, hey, we talked to your student today and they told us they were having some thoughts, and I just want you to be aware of that and to, maybe start up that conversation with them. And we do that so that you can keep your child safe, because if we don't tell you that, how can you know what's going on? On top of that, whenever a student talks about suicide and an assessment is created, a safety plan is always created, and we make sure the students have that and that parents have that as well. And then we provide resources. So we don't just say your kid's suicidal and there's nothing we can do. We always try to give you a referral, whether that's to Nationwide or Southeast or another community mental health resource, because anyone thinking about suicide, that is a mental health issue, and we want to make sure that they get what they need. And then we may even request that, depending on the level of crisis, that you come and pick up your child to take them directly to the hospital for further assessment. And those will be for our more high intensity crisis situations where it's likely that your student might be hospitalized. And then upon a return to school, we will coordinate with Nationwide or the hospital to obtain a copy of the safety plan that may have been completed at the hospital that may have information that the school didn't have in their conversation with the student. Next slide, please. And then finally, what we do when a student is hospitalized. So of course, we want to inform the administrators of our building. So know that if your student ends up being hospitalized, we definitely want to let our principals of our building know that, just so that they can make sure that the crisis management team knows what they need to do to support your student in the best way possible. The school will also contact the family of the child and inform them of any supports that are available at the school, and will coordinate that care that the child receives while they're in the hospital. It's really important that we have our families sign a release of information, sometimes referred to in short as an ROI, so that the school can coordinate care with the student, with their provider. Even though we have a good partnership with Nationwide, we still need to make sure we have family permission to know the information and the care your child is receiving, because that allows the school to best support the child and know what they can do to make sure the child has everything that they need to be successful. We also would want the provider to have a copy of the safety plan, so we have it at the school, and so we can share that with their teacher, so that anytime we see additional warning signs and we think a crisis may be developing again, we can make sure we step in early and make sure we have the supports necessary for the student. The social worker will often adjust this plan to be more fitted for the school environment. Many safety plans address the home environment and not being in school, but the social worker will work with the family and the student to make sure that the safety plan they have is specific to school, and that privacy and confidentiality is of the utmost importance. And then obviously we contact the family each step. I know in part of all the safety plans I create for our school, I make sure that it involves the social worker continuously contacting the parent and letting them know, hey, here's what's going on, here's what's happening today, just to keep you in the loop. And so you're never in the dark about what's going on with your child. But just know we are doing all we can to support your child in the event that unfortunately they end up in a situation where they've experienced crisis, where they maybe have had a suicide attempt or are thinking about suicide to a really intense level. Just know we have the supports available to help them. That's all for me. Oh, no, transitioning back to school. So students will obviously have the safety plan created by the social worker, and that's reviewed with the student, the family, and their teachers. And obviously we want to establish that the student, whether or not your student is virtual or whether or not they're hybrid, especially with this year, what may needed to be included in the safety plan. And then obviously teachers need to be informed for warning signs. Obviously regular mental health check-ins will occur with the school social worker to ensure that the student is doing well in school. And then the social worker will always reach out to Nationwide or the provider just to see how the child is doing in terms of maybe their outside counseling, to maybe ensure that they need adjusted care or additional care.
Well, Mara, Sarah, and Christina, thank you so very much. We as a community are very lucky to have a mental health team like this supporting all of our students in all of our schools. And I had the honor of watching the mental health team in action last week, working with a family, and the level of compassion and the level of support that was displayed to this family. I was never more proud. So thank you all for tonight and for all you do. Emily, I want to also extend some gratitude to you. What a relief it is to know that we have students who are listening and willing to listen to their peers, to make sure that their peers are well taken care of. We often forget that, when we are here to serve our students and families, but we often forget that our students are also our greatest resource. And you have certainly proven that tonight. So thank you for all you are doing to keep our kids safe as well. With that, it is my next great honor to reconnect us with a partnership that I am so terribly proud of here in Reynoldsburg City Schools. We are so fortunate to have such a strong partnership with Nationwide Children's Hospital, who many of you might be aware, we have the school-based healthcare clinic at the Livingston Avenue campus to serve our community. And they do so much more than just physical health checks, but they also are deeply embedded in the mental health of our students. And to have them right next door in our community and right here in our community within our schools is such a value add to our district. It's my pleasure to introduce Ed Mojes, who is a clinical lead school-based supervisor with Nationwide Children's Hospital, John Ackerman, who is the suicide prevention coordinator at Nationwide Children's, and Andrea Weisberger, who is the school-based clinician at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And the three of them are going to share their perspective and their level of support for the students in our community and the families in our community. So I think I'm turning it over probably to Eden first, I'm guessing.
Yes, thank you, David. First, I want to say thank you for all the parents who had come to join us for this really important discussion. I know we've had, you had a lot of information and you probably don't know where to start and where to go, but just know that you have support. You're not alone in this. The district is available to you with all the information you received today. We're here to support you, so just know that we're here for you. And with that, I would like Andrea to give us some moment of just taking a deep breath.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Eden, and thank you guys for having us here. We're really honored to be partnered with Reynoldsburg and to be able to come and talk with you about a variety of subjects, but specifically tonight surrounding this topic, very, very difficult topic of suicide. So we know how difficult that topic is. So I want to just honor that, honor how hard it is, and also honor that anxiety that a lot of people feel when the topic comes up. So before we even get started, on our part of the presentation, I'd actually like to lead you guys in a quick exercise just so that we can model different things that you can do both for yourself but also for your students and children that you're working with. So I'm going to ask both the parents who are watching, but also actually our presenters too, if you'll, just follow me in a quick, short exercise of deep breathing. So let's first breathe in through our nose as deeply as we can, filling your stomach up with air. Hold it for a second, and then breathe out through your mouth slowly. I naturally close my eyes when I do this, so if you choose to keep your eyes open, that's okay too. But closing them sometimes will help you to really concentrate on that breath. So let's again do that. Breathe in through your nose. Hold it, and then breathe out through your mouth slowly. Sometimes doing an exercise like that can really help to ready both our minds and our bodies to discuss something that's really hard, but also to do in the middle of it so that we can make sure that we're fully present in this really difficult topic. So as you can see right here, we're talking about at the very beginning, talking about this parental self-care, and that's something I wanted to make sure that we covered today before we talk about anything else, is making sure that you take care of yourself. This has been a rough year for everybody, and so we want to make sure that you guys are taking care of yourselves too. So after, of course, we talk about parental self-care, we want to talk about ways now that you can respond to your child. So we have here a list of things that are helpful, but then also things that are unhelpful when talking about suicide with your child. Some helpful things are remaining calm. If you need to, take those few deep breaths, and you can honor that and model it for your kids, saying, you know what, this is kind of a tough topic for me as well. I'm going to take a real quick deep breath before I respond or before we really dive into it. Be patient. A part of my work as a counselor is sometimes I am dropping everything so that I can attend to an assessment for suicidal ideations. And so recognizing this might not be a short discussion, it might take some time, but it is a really important thing to make sure that we talk about fully and really show our children that we're willing to be able to have that longer conversation so that we can fully talk about it. Remind them that you care. Really at the heart of it, if you're feeling anxious or worried or even angry about these thoughts, knowing that that's coming from a place of caring because you're worried about them. So reminding them, I care about you, I'm here for you. Communicate to them that suicide is in fact preventable and it's treatable. You can be very direct about your concerns. Speaking directly is actually the best thing because it makes kids realize like, oh, okay, this topic is not taboo. We can have further discussions about it. And then this last one is getting professional help. If it's getting to a place where you're like, oh, this is over my head. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm feeling really anxious about if I'm being helpful or not. There are lots of different things that you can do, and we'll provide those to you, different resources that you can pull from if you do feel like you're getting to a place that you're not sure you're going to be able to help with. And then also things that might be unhelpful. Debating whether suicide is right or wrong is really not going to change someone's mind or be supportive in that moment. Same thing with lecturing the value of life. I believe at the last parent university, I made the joke about, it's myself as a parent, I love giving a good lecture. We're really good at that. But in these moments, it's not helpful. Questioning why someone may feel this way. So of course, as parents, we want to know why kids are feeling depressed or anxious or feeling suicidal, because we want to know why is this happening so we can prevent it and stop it. But sometimes they might not know. And so asking the why puts more pressure on the situation. And then this last one is promising you'll keep their suicidal thoughts a secret. One of the other clinicians at Nationwide Children's Hospital, she cracks me up. She tells her students she's a tattletale. She'll be very honest about it. Now, of course, she says that in a very joking manner. But she says, if you say you're going to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else, I'm going to have to let someone know. And we all have that policy of, I will keep things confidential until you're unsafe. I always say confidentiality is my second priority. My first priority is safety. This next part is just ways that you can strengthen that connection with your youth within the topic of suicide, but also with, outside of this topic. But these are things that you can do to make sure that they feel supported by you, so that they will come to you about this. So the first one is setting that stage, increasing these opportunities just to talk. Mealtime, eating meals together is a really great place to start. Another one is actually car rides. And I'll add in that car rides also going for walks. And the reason why that can be so helpful is it's very non-confrontational. You're both looking straight. You might be also, driving or something, looking out the window, that kind of stuff. So we feel a little bit more open to be able to have those tougher discussions. Next way to set that stage is being willing to talk about difficult topics, not just suicide, but those other harder things that are, more difficult to talk about with your students. If you have these more open, honest conversations about them, then they know, okay, I can talk about these hard things. Full attention and support. So making sure that they know I'm present, I'm with you. Trying, know it's hard, but trying not to text during these discussions. Or, if you do get a text, even there's something very powerful about when my phone buzzes while I'm in a session with a student and I don't take my eyes off of them, they almost seem taken aback and surprised that I'm not going to take my attention off of them, even just to check my phone real quick. It can be very, very powerful. And then just taking this curious approach, just being curious about their lives. Sometimes they get annoyed by that, and that comes with our next part of being consistent and persistent. We often get from our students, I don't want to talk to you. I don't, leave me alone, those kinds of things. And of course, we do want to honor, a certain aspect of that if they need their own space and those kinds of things, but not allowing that to have this complete hands-off approach of, okay, well, they don't want me around, so I'll just never be around. Communicating that, okay, I'm here and I'm ready when you're ready. Guiding by example, so that's self-care. I will tell you that your teens and children notice when you're taking care of yourself. I hear it a lot, and they like that. They're glad when you do things for yourself, and do things to take care of yourself, because then it kind of gives them permission to be able to do it as well. And then, of course, advocating for your students when it's appropriate. So if your child has already had a suicide assessment, either at the school or at the hospital, you're probably already familiar with the idea of a safety plan. A safety plan is basically a plan for a child, family, everybody to follow if and when suicidal ideations come up. So we have some really great mobile safety plans. Of course, there's an app for that. So here are some really great apps if you're safety planning with your child and would like a little bit of guidance in how to do that. Here's some other safety planning tips. Having your child take a picture of it so it's always with them. Actually, surprisingly, some students really want printed copies, even in our digital age. So I do oftentimes print them out so they have hard copies of them. But of course, this generation does really love their phone. I shouldn't say this generation, my generation does too. We all love our phones. They can be very helpful in a lot of different ways. So encouraging them to take a picture of their safety plan, it can ensure they always have it on them, because almost always they have their phones. I would also mention in that, when a lot of times parents, rightfully so, will use taking phones as a consequence for negative behavior. And so if your child has a safety plan that's on their phone, just making sure that they have a copy of their safety plan, so when you do take their phone as a consequence, they still have access to their safety plan. Another thing that you can do is help practice calling these national or local crisis lines, or texting the crisis text line. They're really, really kind, the people who work there, and this is what they do. So they actually really appreciate it when you want to help your child practice calling them and show that it's not a scary or difficult thing. It really normalizes it for them. And then this last one, encouraging them to have a safety plan posted all around the house. So I have clients who have it posted on their fridge. They have it in their bedroom. They have it on the bathroom mirror, everywhere. I would also suggest posting it places where they feel triggered the most. So bathrooms do tend to be a place that students get triggered, and then their bedroom. So having it in those places where a lot of those suicidal thoughts come up is a really great place to start. I also want to briefly mention hospitalization and, our behavioral health pavilion. You or your family may have already taken your child there before, or maybe you've actually thought about taking them, but something has stopped you for whatever reason. I really, again, would like to honor how intimidating and difficult that choice can be to take your child to the hospital. But I really want to remind you that sometimes that is just the absolute best way to get support and to keep your child safe if they're not able to be safe in your home. And we can be very, very helpful at the hospital in making sure that your home is a safe place and can become a safe place within these safety plans. So a way to, I know we've already talked about it, but just additional things on how to support your child, and reiterate that when they return to school, we can definitely make sure that they feel supported. So of course, informing the school social worker or counselor when your child does return to school. I understand and recognize that because of the stigma of mental health, students are often embarrassed to have the school know why they were absent, but we really do recommend connecting with the school social worker or counselor within the mental health team of your child's visit to the hospital. And maybe even possibly, like we mentioned, having a signed release of information, as well as the safety plan available for the school, so that they can be on board. And really, it's to help support your child when they're at the school, because they're at the school, but 9 hours out of the day. So they need to make sure that they have access to that safety plan there as well. And then this last thing is advocate for your child's needs in school. They'll probably have some work that they need to make up for the time that they missed. And so advocating that they probably will need a little bit more time to be able to complete that stuff. And I know the mental health team at the schools are absolutely willing to help you out with that. So these are ways that you can support your child when there is a death by suicide within the community. Unfortunately, death by suicide is very real, and it's a present issue in our community. And it's important to be willing to engage your child in these discussions if they do bring up the topic. This way, you can communicate that these topics are okay to discuss in your home, and it also will increase the likelihood that if your child is having their own thoughts of suicide, they will come and tell you. So this first one, being open, you don't have to have all the answers, or really any answers at all. This is a topic where, as you can see, we have many, many professionals who have dedicated their lives to this topic, and we're still learning things and still doing research and still finding out newer, better ways to support the community. So it's okay if you don't have all the answers, but really just communicating to your child that you're willing to discuss the concerns. Then, of course, we have conversation starters, very open things like, how are you doing with what was on the news today? Or what was the big discussion in school today among your friends? We have some really great conversation starters on our Sleeves website. And that's a really great place to go if you're not quite sure where to begin. The last thing I want to make sure that I touch on is this idea of contagion and social media. We discussed at the last Parent University, but I think it's really worth discussing again. We have a term called contagion when it comes to death by suicide. When there is a death by suicide in a school, community, or family, we often see an increase in suicidal ideations or other deaths by suicide in people who are connected to that person. Because of social media, people are far more connected with people in other communities and schools than ever before. So a death by suicide of a student on the west side of Columbus could still impact students in Reynoldsburg because they knew them from TikTok or Snapchat or something like that. So here's a little bit of information about our school-based program. I know that the mental health team at Reynoldsburg talked about our program a little bit, and so I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that we do. We do, in fact, provide individual counseling for students, not just students who are struggling with suicidal ideations, but all different kinds of concerns that might get in the way of academic success. So we have individual counseling, but we also have preventative services, so things that we do. And actually, John will talk to you about one of our preventative services that we provide. And then the last thing is we have groups as well. So we really do try to reach kids on all different levels, kids who need one-on-one support because of, some kind of crisis situation going on or a mental health concern. But then we also have groups which are larger, and maybe they just need an extra support right there. And then we have our preventative services to make sure that these things don't become an issue. So now I'm going to turn it over to John so he can discuss the other programs Nationwide Children's Hospital have that are specific to suicide prevention and research.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. And really, I have the privilege of taking the baton from all of the wonderful speakers. I really would like to thank Assistant Superintendent Baker for really spearheading this evening, and Dr. Brown for hosting this, and the wonderful counselors at Reynoldsburg Schools, and our own partners at Children's for having this conversation. Thank you, parents, for being here, for listening to what we think is the kind of critical first steps in making suicide prevention a priority. Tonight, I think, should give you some information that will arm you with what to look for, how to respond, who to contact, and this is really essential for helping your child be as safe as possible. So at Nationwide Children's Hospital, we, about 6 years ago, had the opportunity to form what I think is a pretty novel center. One that combines our research institute and our behavioral health services. It's the only one like it, to my knowledge, in the country. And what it allows us to do is take the things that we are learning every day about what places young people at risk and how to identify and support them, and turn it into best practices in prevention. It allows us to support our community, and we don't take that responsibility lightly. So one of the things that we're tasked with doing is trying to help provide guidance to our school communities, and really our communities at large. So our primary responsibility is to support schools implementing evidence-based prevention programs, but I will add now that we also do a lot of training, both in person and virtual, mostly virtual right now, for communities, for faith-based organizations, for youth serving groups and things like that, whether it be boys and girls clubs or other groups that serve young people. So we do a lot of work to make sure that safety net is broad, because we know that preventing suicide is not one person's job. You have a lot of amazing counselors and mental health professionals and educators on this call, but it's really a team effort. I think Austin did a wonderful job talking about how Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation takes that community role seriously. So we try to work with them and other partners to make sure that we can guide next steps. So we do some consultation around policy, prevention, and postvention, which is responding after a student has died by suicide. It's our the part of our services we never hope to use, but we know that good postvention is suicide prevention. So we have that as part of our guidance. We also have to make sure that if a young person is brave enough, is strong enough, and is able to share with us that they are struggling with thoughts of suicide or engaging in any behaviors, that when they are received by mental health professionals or counselors or parents, that they have the ability to kind of talk and have a conversation with a trusted adult, and those adults are not going to be either scared or misinformed about how to respond. So we take a big training approach at the hospital, and we've trained over 600 of our behavioral health providers in how to do this work really well. And we want to actually train everyone in the community to do this well, and partner with folks like Austin to do that as broadly as possible. We do some work with journalists, because unfortunately the media doesn't always do the best job of reporting in it. But we know if we can partner with the media and they do good stories of coping and recovery and how to tackle suicide prevention and provide those resources, that we can absolutely reduce suicide in our community. And then we want to make sure that everything we do is effective, that if we're going to invest our time and emotional energy into this, that it's really going to make a difference. Next slide. So every school-based suicide prevention program, including the work that we do at Reynoldsburg, they're doing right now, both doing Hope Squad, which is an incredible peer-to-peer suicide prevention program. And a lot of the work that we do with the program called Signs of Suicide is something that we want to make sure that we are decreasing suicide risk by increasing the knowledge about depression and suicide warning signs, reducing stigma, because like physical illness, mental illness requires treatment and care and an investment. And then we encourage help seeking for oneself to obtain the support of a friend and trusted adults, and that it's okay to reach out. So that's a key message in any good program. And then that really the parents, the caregivers, the staff, everyone sees that they have a role. And I thought Austin covered that as well as that could have, so I won't belabor that. But that really is really the comprehensive ability to help a school system move forward. It's worth noting that good suicide prevention isn't just one program. It isn't one policy that you check the box. It's about all of those little things coming together. That's why it's so exciting that we have all the counselors here, the educators, administrators, community partners, because you really start to make a difference when you have everyone understanding that it's the little things, it's the everyday check-ins to the emotional knowledge, the social emotional development of kids. And when school districts take that seriously, you start to see change from kindergarten to graduation. And I think that's why I just am thrilled with what Reynoldsburg City Schools are doing right now. And I think that's gonna pay off in the long run. We talk about how sometimes schools get locked into outcomes, and we're outcome people. We love outcomes. But if you start focusing on sort of the idea that we need to jam as much content in as possible without attending to that emotional health, what we know is you're not going to get either result, because only when you have addressed underlying security and safety and emotional health needs do you have kids who perform at their best. So sometimes these investments might not look like they're supporting the academic mission, but in my opinion, and a lot of data would say they absolutely are. So I think it's important to understand that these things all tie together for the well-being of kids and their safety. The next slide. Before I turn it over to David one more time, but I just want to let folks know that there's a couple things we know about the problems and a lot of resources. First, to kind of wrap up what everyone has said before, suicide among young people is commonly, or the suicidal thinking is common. Suicide deaths, fortunately, are not very common. However, we have an opportunity to intervene early and get the support to folks before they reach that crisis point. The more we intervene early before they reach a point of crisis, the better we're doing. If we're reaching the point where lots of kids are only telling us when they're in crisis, we've actually missed our prevention opportunities. So we want to go upstream, and that's why these programs are so important. It is hard for young people to acknowledge it, but it's not impossible. And when you set up your culture in your school to know that understanding when your friends are in need and your ability to reach out is not only possible, but it's expected, that's your culture, then you temporarily see more kids coming forward and you're like, oh no, we've got more kids reaching out. That is a very, very good thing. If your kids are coming to you about mental health challenges and you're there for them and you've set that table, you are far less likely to have a young person that loses their life, and that is so critical. And then lastly, it's gonna take that systematic approach and lots of partnerships. And I do view this as hopefully a night that begins something that just grows in the future. So these are some of the lines that we'll leave you with that really Andrea did a great job of talking through how you use them best and familiarize your family with them in advance. It's never too early to be aware of what you would do in a crisis. So don't save these lines and save these steps to tell your kids once they're already in crisis. Talk to them now. Let them know. You will support them whether they're in great mental health or when they're struggling. And because ultimately it's going to be that human connection, that knowledge, and that safety that if things get tough, they know who to turn to. And I think they've got a lot of great people to turn to at Reynoldsburg City Schools. They've got a lot of wonderful counselors. And if you ever need to consult with us at Nationwide Children's, we're very happy to do that. And hopefully we can just support the rest of this partnership. So I will turn it back over to David.
Great, thank you, John. And thank you, Ed and John and Andrea, all three of you, for not only, again, sharing your professional knowledge tonight, but also just being there every single day and knowing that we have that resource for our students and our families is such a relief to us. So very much appreciated this evening. Val, rather than showing this slide, although I think the partnerships are very important, will you go back one more slide? I want to leave this slide up while we are wrapping things up tonight to make sure that our moms and dads and our caregivers have the time they need to write these numbers down so that you have them. Know that we will post the slide deck on the district's website probably sometime tomorrow so that you will have access to them. But there's no better time than now to write these numbers down and have them available just in case you ever need them. So let's leave this slide up instead of our thank you slide. I think this is more important tonight. Also, just again, I want to thank all of our presenters, not only from Nationwide Children's, but also our own mental health team, Christina, Sarah, Amra, and of course, Emily, for the work that she's doing with her peers. And as well, thank you, Austin, and your work you're doing at the state level. It was an honor to work with you before, and I'm so thrilled we got to engage in this tonight. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of the those out there who are watching tonight. The fact that you took time this evening says a lot about your willingness to take care of our community. Not only your own child, but the more information you have, you're going to be taking care of all of our children as well. And so thank you for taking this time and the courage to have these conversations. I greatly appreciate it. I do want to remind our parents that we are a phone call away. You have these numbers here when it's it's not during school hours and you can't reach one of us in the building, but during the school hours, you know that your school counselor, social worker, we as administrators are a phone call away. And so if you feel the need to reach out that your kiddo is struggling, that's what we're here for. So don't hesitate to call. Also want to remind our parents and caregivers that tomorrow you'll receive an email. That email will have a link to a survey so you can give us feedback on tonight's presentation. You can give us suggestions for future topics and ask any questions. Those questions that we are not able to answer internally, we will certainly turn to our partners and get those answers for you, and we will get those answers back to you as quickly as we can. I'll leave you just looking forward to our next Parent University event sometime late in May. We will not do a live webinar such as this, but we will do a pre-recorded webinar. The topic there is going to, again, revisit this notion of social emotional learning, but we're going to look at restorative practices and restorative discipline, both at school and at home, because at the end of May is that time of year when we will be off for the summer. And so we wanted to share some things that we are doing in school to help with behaviors and how we address behaviors so that hopefully those practices can continue through the summer at home. And then students will have that transition, easy transitions to and from the school and home setting. Again, thank you. It's an honor to serve you this evening. It's an honor to serve this community on a daily basis. And I'm so grateful that we have a community that cares so much. Thank you all. Have a great evening, and we will see you next month.